Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We have had some lunch here at the Weather and Climate Summit, Glenn Gerberg Weather and Climate Summit. Thanks for joining us back, and we hope that you enjoyed the cycling of the Weather Channel special, Sandy, Anatomy of a Superstorm. So today, what you see in front of you, I'm not going to stand here the whole time. I'll be out and about a little bit, but Sarah Maxwell is handling and fielding your questions that will come live through the internet, and then Sarah will ask them verbally to each one of the speakers, whoever you'd like to hear an answer from. And so right here on my left is Bob Rutledge from the Space Weather Prediction Center. We have Chris Strager from the National Weather Service headquarters, Rick Knabb, who is sitting down in the front, the director of the National Hurricane Center, and Barry Scanlon from Whit O'Brien's here, and he spoke this morning about emergency management aspects and communication. So I'm going to just walk over off camera, and we'll start to ask some questions with Sarah. So thanks everybody for joining, and we'll just continue the questions until it ends, and everybody gets their questions answered. So thanks very much.
Well, welcome panelists, and you may get off easier than you think, because at this time we have one question. And this one question is for Dr. Knabb, and it comes from Craig, who's in Canada. And his question is, have they thought of extending inland warnings beyond near coastal counties and considered issuing tropical warnings if needed in the inland WFOs and Great Lakes?
First of all, it's a great question because it highlights the fact that tropical cyclones, tropical depression storms, and hurricanes are not just coastal events. There are significant events and impacts that can occur far inland from where the center of circulation comes ashore and potentially for days after the fact. My colleague Chris Strager from the Weather Service can probably chime in on this as well, but I'll highlight the fact that we already issue a large collection of watches, warnings, and advisories in various parts of inland United States regions, depending upon what hazard they're experiencing. For example, after a cyclone moves inland and can drop a lot of rain, then some of the river basins fill up and you can have river flood warnings issued in your particular location, again, well away from the coastline. During Sandy, for example, I was briefing emergency managers all the way up to the President of the United States about watches and warnings and hazards and impacts that we were experiencing in the Great Lakes as a result of the large and sprawling system of Sandy. Now, it wasn't too long ago that the Weather Service started issuing inland tropical storm and hurricane warnings to cover the wind hazard. And one thing we're looking forward to in the next few years, perhaps as early as 2015, is issuing a storm surge warning. You might think, well, that's just a coastal thing, but think of places like Lake Charles, Louisiana, where you can get storm surge flooding in that area more than 25 miles away from the immediate Gulf of Mexico coastline. So we're definitely thinking inland on tropical cyclones, and as we move toward in the tropical arena, issuing the forecasts and warnings that are hazard specific, the warnings for wind where the wind is going to be hazardous, the warnings for storm surge where that hazard is going to happen. And our local forecast offices already issue all kinds of flood warnings and in cases like Sandy blizzard warnings for inland locations when a tropical cyclone was in the mix.
I was going to say, Rick, it was interesting on this one with in West Virginia, the mountains of West Virginia, 36 inches of snow associated with Sandy. And I think probably, if anything, where I see going, and again, this is just me talking now, looking out, I would probably see a simplification of what we have, of the hazards associated with these events as they come along. So I think it's going to be interesting over the next couple years to get some more opinions and interviews with some of our users to see exactly where we go next.
Okay, great, thank you. I do have another question. This one is for Bob Rutledge of Space Weather. And this one comes from Mike Collington. This says, Mike Smith, formerly of AccuWeather, stated that he was neutral on climate change because of the current solar cycle. He went on to say that if the solar cycle doesn't change as it anticipated to in the next 1 to 2 years, then he would conclude that there was something to climate change and global warming. Do you see a connection between 2012, the warmest year on record, and solar cycles?
Yeah, so I can't answer that. Let me make a disclaimer right up front. I'm not an authoritative climate scientist, but not to be funny, but I work in a building with them. So I think they're, in Boulder, they do have, you know, the world's premier experts on that. And my sense, just my personal sense of getting a feel for that, is that the system is not completely understood by any means, and the models to predict climate aren't perfect, but that you cannot reproduce the long term, you know, before mankind started forcing it, the anthropogenic effects. You can't reproduce that on long time scales without taking the solar cycle into consideration. So, you know, if you look on a few years time scale, certainly we're not, I don't think the sun is, you know, influencing weather next week. You know, maybe there is some small seasonal dependence. I think the jury is largely out. I think it's second order kind of forcing. I think it's compared to the anthropogenic effects. I think it's, you know, maybe on that 10 to 30% order is my sense from seeing the different presentations. But again, my opinion, not no as authoritative climate scientist by any sense of the word.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have another question for Dr. Knabb. This one comes from Bob Berwin, who's actually local here in Colorado. Can you discuss the proposed storm surge product in the context of climate change?
Sure. We've known for a long time that storm surge is the one weather-related hazard that is capable of claiming the most lives in one day. It's a big deal. It's a big problem. We went for a number of years a while back where we didn't have a lot of really big storm surge events, and in recent years we've had quite a few of them. So we've known for a long time that we need to make sure that people understand the storm surge hazard, which would prompt them ideally to prepare for it in the off season, because you need to know, for example, if you even live in a hurricane storm surge evacuation zone, so that you know how to prepare or whether to prepare for that particular hazard, or if wind is more of your issue or inland flooding is. So you got to know your risk to storm surge in the first place. The issue with putting out a new storm surge warning is that we want people to have a warning that goes with this particular hazard, because storm surge and hurricane or tropical storm force winds don't always occur in the same place or the same time. So because of the magnitude of the hazard and because it has its own time and place that doesn't match up with the wind all the time, we think that the storm surge deserves its own warning. And that's the proposal that's on the table. We're engaging our users in emergency management and media and others in the public on the idea, and presuming that we continue to get the positive feedback we've already received through some of the social science studies, that we'll take the next 2 hurricane seasons to push that forward. Where does storm surge and climate change overlap? Well, the issue is sea level rise. If sea level were to rise more over the next century than, say, it has over the previous century, that would just increase the vulnerability that we have in coastal regions to storm surge. But a lot of that vulnerability simply has to do, in addition to the fact that we have a larger, more dense built environment, more people in the coastal zone. So you combine those 2 factors, and you look at recent years that we've had storm surge events that unavoidably will happen again, that all of those issues need to be considered and planned for to the best of our ability when making sure that we're as prepared for the storm surge hazard as we can be, in terms of being prepared to evacuate and know who needs to evacuate, and doing whatever we can to mitigate against the hazard. One big example in recent years being the hurricane risk reduction system built after Katrina in the New Orleans area.
Great, thank you. This is a question to the entire panel. We have a student online. His question is, he's trying to break into meteorology. He's a second-year college student. He's wondering what he should be studying and concentrating on, since course selection is not easy and the meteorology field is changing so rapidly.
I'll start off with that one if I could. Some of the advice that we've been giving out to students that have been wanting to break into meteorology, it's diversify yourself. To stay right down the middle, you need to be a very good scientist, of course, to be successful in this field. We're finding those students who bring other skills, be it computer skills to it, be it social science skills, be it communication skills. That's really what's resonating today. I know when I review resumes and I see people coming on, it's those types of things that I like to see. And talking with other meteorologists in charge of offices in the National Weather Service, they really enjoy bringing that other aspect into the office. It's in order to be a team forecasting like this, everybody has to pitch in and contribute different things, and those different types of skills from a diversification is really, I think, would help very much.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up, and maybe others on the panel would like to comment too, and that is one big example of where I have seen some students recently trying to achieve a dual focus is in meteorology and emergency management. And it is the case that emergency management agencies hire meteorologists, correct?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I second what's been said, whether it's communications or the social sciences, as well as not just emergency management, but all different parts of the private sector. It used to just be in critical infrastructure, you know, oil companies who needed to know what kind of winds were coming through the Gulf and how to make decisions. Now you see meteorology and the science and trying to help with decision making really affect hosts of different industries and around the world, right? I think some of the international aspects, because of supply chains and other things that go on in the world, universities have campuses around the world now, you know, so I think having a more international look at things and understanding would probably be helpful as well.
And a lot of these, I guess, terms are resonating too. I've had interest from other countries about a weather-ready world type deal for other countries. We're just going to keep it one country at a time for right now, but just something to think about that it's going global. And
maybe kind of tie a bow on this to directly answer the question about, you know, what should I be concentrating on if I'm a meteorology student? And as Chris mentioned, diversifying is important. For example, if you are applying for a job for a meteorologist and everything else considered equal, but you've got technical skills and you can program a computer, or you know GIS, or you have a social science background, or you have an emergency management background, that can not only set you apart from the other candidates, but it can prepare you to actually do the job that you're applying for even better. So diversifying certainly is key, and fortunately, I think some of the university programs that had historically just focused on meteorology are starting to expose their students to some of these related fields as they go through their undergraduate work.
And Rick, that goes into with academia's role too, Weather Ready Nation, and that's all part of it. And we've been fortunate over the past year to talk with a number of universities, and that's what I think they're trying to do now. The focus has become a little bit broader.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, our next question comes from Mike in St. Louis, and this one is to the entire panel. Should FEMA, flood insurance programs, etc., take sea level rise and or storm surge into account when drawing floodplain boundaries?
Okay, I'll go first. I believe that they do take storm surge models into, you know, with the A zone, well, they've changed the name of it, but with the surge zones are part of how they price the insurance and how they do the flood zones now. I think the sea level rise would, or other climate changes, just go into the engineering and the technology when they're looking at flood zones and the proper elevations that people should have to be above the base flood elevation. So I think those are in there now. And then, of course, a lot of the responsibility ends up on localities as to how and where they want to let people build in their communities.
And, of course, when you think long-term vulnerability, it's a forecast uncertainty problem. We don't know exactly how much sea level will rise over the next decades. But when it comes to present-day evacuation zones, for storm surge, like if you're preparing for the 2013 hurricane season and you live in a coastal region and you want to know what your hurricane evacuation zone is, the zones that are drawn out now for this year are as accurate as they can be based on a collection of scenarios for that area in present day sea level conditions. So for planning for evacuations for a hurricane that might come your way this year, we're all set to go.
Okay, this one is also for the panel. How can emergency managers and the National Weather Service work closer together?
Let me go ahead, if I can start out on that one. With Weather Ready Nation, we're looking to partner with some other agencies, for example, American Meteorological Society, to perhaps put together some short courses. It would be on a Weather Ready Nation type of scenario where we would be able to educate emergency managers, local elected officials, and some of the key concepts of what we're looking for Weather Ready Nation, how to get the communities better prepared. In terms of emergency managers and working with the Weather Service, my strong recommendation, though, is for the emergency manager, whatever is your home weather forecast office, if you haven't already, or if you would like more information, please contact your WFO, Weather Forecast Office, and I know they'd be glad to work with you to get you some more information. Those are just a few ways that I can think of off the top of my head.
Sure, and some of these things are already happening. The Weather Ready Nation decision support services already exist. For example, on this very day, this very moment, there are more than a couple of dozen emergency managers at the state and local level at the National Hurricane Center getting training all of this week from our hurricane specialists and storm surge experts on the hurricane hazards, the products that we put out, and going through exercises to learn and enhance their decision-making process for hurricane evacuations. And this is just the first of 5 different emergency management courses that we at the Hurricane Center, in concert with some of our local forecast offices, are going to be putting on this hurricane off-season. So this is something we've been doing for quite a while, getting to know one another's issues, doing training sessions, all the conferences we do in the hurricane off-season. These have been happening for a long time, but what's happening now is that we are, I think, doing a better job in both the Weather Service and emergency management of understanding each other's worlds before we put new products into place, before we put new procedures into place, putting people from the Weather Service in an emergency management agency during an event. This is what the Weather Ready Nation looks like, right, Chris?
Exactly, and during Sandy, we actually had 20 people from our different forecast offices embedded at different locations across the Northeast. And before we send them out, we want them to be versed and be able to speak the language of the emergency management community. So that's one way that we're trying to get back in. But yes, Sandy was probably our biggest to-date effort to be able to get people embedded with emergency management.
Yeah, now that's not to say that we've got it all figured out. We have a lot more to learn, and the program is really in its beginning stages. But we're hoping that by doing all of these things better and learning from every year, learning from every storm, putting new products into place that make the whole communication between emergency managers, weather service, and the media go even better, that we will all be more weather ready. And that's an ongoing process. I don't think we're ever going to come to one of these panel sessions and go, you know, it's all figured out, everybody's completely weather ready, no more problems. It's a difficult world to prepare for and respond to these emergencies, but we're getting better every year.
Well, it's gone on a long time. As they said, they had a lot of people embedded throughout the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic in people's emergency operations centers. This goes back, you know, there's been a long partnership between emergency management and the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center. Back in the mid-90s, through a partnership, Director Witt and the Hurricane Center embedded FEMA people in the Hurricane Center.
The Hurricane Liaison Team that still exists to this day.
Right, to make sure that there weren't sort of messages lost between, you know, people of different disciplines. They were actually working in the, it does help to work in the same building, so they were in the same building. But part of what, you know, I think the importance of this summit here and other things, other after-action reports and things that are being looked at for Sandy and other events, is it's not just the partnership between emergency management and the folks who forecast weather. It's also the folks here who communicate that weather, and it's the elected officials who all of those emergency managers work for, because often they're the ones who are communicating that message. And then how does that whole set of 4 people then deal with the private sector? Because you're going to be making decisions on evacuation or not evacuating and a whole host of other issues, when in reality a lot of the public sector relies on the private sector. As we all know, it's often quoted, more than 85% of critical infrastructure is in private hands. So no matter what any president, governor, or mayor does, they're still reliant on utilities, people who operate transportation systems, and others. And if they're not all working, you know, off the same songbook as to what everyone expects this weather system to do to a particular area, we're all not doing our jobs. That partnership needs to exist, you know, far beyond just the folks who are forecasting weather and the emergency managers.
And all of this is why every hurricane off-season, and we're just using hurricanes as one example here, why every hurricane off-season we spend months and months having conferences and meetings with the various federal and state and local partners to continue this conversation, so that every year, ideally, we do it better than we did it the previous year.
One follow-up question. This is Dave Jones. I just wanted to ask, listening to your answer, are there plans, or does anyone from the National Weather Service attend like the Conference of Mayors meeting, or, you know, other decision makers meetings with regard to working closer together from the National Weather Service perspective to actually speaking with local mayors?
Well, I know if it's not the mayor, I know we do the NEMA, National Emergency Manager Association, the International IAEM, Association of Emergency Managers. Rick, I'm not sure about the mayor conference, so I can't speak to that.
Well, it changes from year to year what particular conferences some of us at the Hurricane Center or elsewhere in the Weather Service we participate in, but there are a whole host of state conferences and meetings that are put on by particular cities that we get engaged in. For example, I'm planning to go to a City of Los Angeles meeting because they want to know, this will be in the summer, how we're handling the hurricane problem and how that plays into all kinds of other hazards and perils and plans. But we go to state emergency management conferences. We go to governors' conferences. The Florida Governor's Hurricane Conference happens in May, for example. So it might not be through a mayor's conference, but I can assure you that we in the Weather Service are engaging with a lot of elected officials at the federal, state, and local level all the time.
And that's a good point. I think going down to the local WFO level 2, everybody's county warning area, they're intimately involved with all of the local government there and all the elected officials. So it goes down to the local boots-on-ground presence at the local forecast office. It's so important, and they're out constantly. I will say, at least from my perspective, at a national level, with Weather Ready Nation over the past year or so, I know the request to speak at different engagements and educate people more on Weather Ready Nation has really been on a rise. So I take that as a good sign.
That's great discussion. I have another question on space weather for Bob. What do you expect in 2013 as far as solar max, and why should each individual be paying attention to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this morning I did show kind of that curve of rising activity. One thing I do want to emphasize is that it's not a sharp peak and it's over. We generally see a rise in activity over the couple years preceding what we end up calling maximum in retrospect, and then really on that 4 or 5 year decline after that, we continue to stay busy. So the big one could happen really at any time. I think this is a smaller than solar cycle than we've observed recently, but I gave an example this morning on an event that was pretty spectacular in July that was headed away from Earth, could have been headed towards Earth. So I mean, I think we've got a reasonable chance of seeing some significant Earth-directed activity. And what was the second part of that question? I apologize.
Why should each individual be paying attention?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think it goes back. Some of them could, I mean, you could go your whole life, some people, and not know that space weather exists. And that's perfectly fine and may be completely appropriate for some. But there are people, if you're using technologies in sensitive ways, particularly with respect to protection of life and property, you have to be aware of the sensitivities to your system. So if you're using GPS for navigation or safety of life issues, you should know and you should be paying attention. So I guess it really, individual interest should vary a lot on what you're doing with that information.
Wonderful. Okay, I have another question from Bob Irwin. If there's time, and I think there is some time we have left, could Dr. Knabb talk more about the 5-day Genesis forecast and perhaps describe how that might look for emergency managers and the public?
Okay, and for those who might not be familiar, the National Hurricane Center puts out a Tropical Weather Outlook product, our TWO. It's issued every 6 hours during the hurricane season, June through November. And it conveys, for individual weather systems that are out there, what the chances are of that system becoming a tropical depression or storm within the next 48 hours. And it will also talk about some of the hazards, particularly rainfall and flooding, that might be associated with that system, and generally where it's headed and what aircraft we might be sending out. That's been a 48-hour product, a 2-day forecast for quite some time. And internally at the Hurricane Center, our hurricane specialists last couple of years have been experimenting with a 5-day probability of formation for individual weather systems, mostly the same systems we've been mentioning in the outlook already. The verification shows that those forecasts are pretty reliable. So scientifically and forecasting-wise, we think we're about ready. It's just a matter of doing a little bit more product development work to put that product into place. It would probably take both a text and a graphical format. It would be quite easy for us to add our text product to have the 5-day forecast in there along with the 2-day. But if we can get that graphic put together for this year, and it would be experimental if we did, but if that comes out this year, then it would basically paint the entire area that over the next 5 days, this system could become a tropical depression or tropical storm. And for systems that are moving, it will essentially give you a little bit of a track forecast about where that system is headed. So for emergency managers, especially for something that might be headed into the Gulf of Mexico or up the East Coast, it's not a depression or storm yet, but it's trying to form on our doorstep. It will be an incredibly valuable heads up for the emergency managers to take some preliminary steps, and it'll get out to the media too so they can alert the public that something might be forming. Don't tune out over the next few days, because we might have something more significant on our hands over the next few days. And I think this is something the emergency managers and the media have been asking for a long time, so we're glad this is probably going to come to fruition, at least experimentally, this year.
Great. Sarah has asked all the questions online. She has typed in to see if anybody has any more. With that, your microphone is dead. Okay, sorry. My other microphone wasn't working. We are asking the final question. If anybody has any other questions to ask online, this has been a terrific panel. It's right on time. It's been, you don't get professionals of this caliber together in one room very often, and it's wonderful that we have this opportunity to ask questions and engage the online audience. And so from student questions to other professional questions, I think we ran a pretty good gamut of topics. And I'd like to thank all of you on the panel. Thank you for your presentations this morning. Thank you for coming back this afternoon to answer these questions. And we hope those of you who can stay a little bit longer into the next day or so, that you enjoy your stay here in Breckenridge at the Glenn Gerberg Weather and Climate Summit. Dr. Knabb, I know you have to take off in the morning. Ever busy is the job of the director of the National Hurricane Center, and also pretty much the face of the National Weather Service, as many have described to me. So thank you all very much. We'll put up the agenda for tomorrow for a little bit, I believe, if we have that. And we'll see everybody back here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock Mountain Time to see the latest weather briefing from Dale Eck, the director of the Global Forecast Office at the Weather Channel. And then we'll continue on with some fabulous presentations tomorrow afternoon. So thank you so much for joining us, and there you have the agenda for tomorrow. It's going to be an exciting time. We hope you all can join us back. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.